Great. Good afternoon. I am Supreme Court Justice Joseph Zayas, the administrative judge of the Supreme Court in Queens County, criminal term, and a former board member of the Latino Judges Association. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing a great friend, the Honorable Jaime Rios, who's a retired New York State Supreme Court Justice for the 11th Judicial District, and who formerly also sat on the appellate term. Justice Rios will share his struggle to become the first Latino to be elected as a judge in the history of Queens County in New York, and will impart some words of wisdom for our future generation of lawyers and judges. Judge Rios, welcome. Judge Rios has been a great friend and a great mentor to me. And every judge that's come after him, so proud of him. So Justice Rios, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your childhood and the life that led up to you going to college, and I'll follow up with some additional questions.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to see you, Joseph. With this pandemic, haven't been able to get to New York and renew my friendships with my former colleagues. I'm a native New Yorker. I was born in the Bronx, raised in the Bronx, attended New York City public schools. I attended the City College, and I'm Puerto Rican heritage. My parents were both born in Puerto Rico, but they met in New York and they were married, and that's how I came to be. So I'm a native New Yorker, and one of the greatest accomplishments in my life was serving the people of New York.
Wonderful. So what sparked your interest in the law, Judge Rios?
Well, like anything else in life, you have steps that you follow, influences that you have, even in your own family. For example, your elder siblings will teach you things. For example, if they're interested in sports, you'll be interested in sports. If they're interested in science, you'll be interested in science. If they attend the university, you will attend the university. So you have that influence at home. I was very fortunate that my mother was a very strong-willed woman who insisted on education. My father was an educated man, but he was a member of the United States Merchant Marine, and he served for 30 years on the seas. So we rarely saw Dad, but his greatest contribution was encouraging us to attend school, pursue our studies, and not to be slackards, if you will. My first interest in the law came when I was a teenager, and I observed that there was a lot of biased treatment of the members of our community. When I say our community, I don't mean Latino community or Black community or white or Asian community. I mean the community that I lived in that was a combination of just about everybody that made up the melting pot of New York City. And because of the economics, I would say that what brought us together was similar economics. We were all in that lower middle class or poverty level, if you will, working class community where the father brought home the bacon and the mother stayed home and took care of the kids. So I saw the injustice, how the police would, and now we see it, it's come nationwide. We see the abuse of the police. But I saw that. And then my father introduced me to a certificate, a parchment that he had. And the name on it was Jose Rios. And I asked my father, whose name was Jose, I said, Dad, is this you? And he said, no, that's your grandfather. Your grandfather was a judge on the island of Puerto Rico in the town of Patillas. And my grandfather, Jose Rios, was appointed by the first regional governor or territorial governor of the United States back in the early 1900s by the name of Hunt. So we had that in the family, and that kind of started the conversation until I got to college.
Right.
In college, a lot of my classmates were interested in being pre-law. I kind of leaned more towards education, being a teacher, because I found it easier to mediate and to arbitrate disagreements between my friends than actually to be an advocate for one cause or the other. I tried to find the middle way, the middle ground. So my introduction to law school actually came years later, after I'd been teaching for 5 years.
And I know you went to Fordham Law School at Lincoln Center, at the Lincoln Center campus there, right? And so what were some of the associations that you were involved with while attending law school?
Well, I think we have to put things in perspective. We have to remember that the overwhelming Latino, if you will, population, Spanish-speaking population of New York City up until the 1960s was primarily Puerto Rican. They had commenced their migration after the First World War. I know my parents came to New York in the early 1920s. So the overwhelming population of Spanish speakers were Puerto Rican. And there were very few lawyers of Puerto Rican heritage, and naturally, very few, if none, that were law professors, and very few students in law school. So it wasn't something that you had a mentor, somebody that could guide you through the process and say, listen, major in pre-law and become a lawyer one day. There was no one in college or no one in the legal profession per se that was available to do that for you. There were a few lawyers that were helpful, but the Puerto Rican Bar Association, which was the Latino Law Association, popular in those days back in the 50s and 60s, had a very few members, maybe less than 50, I would guess. Right. So my decision to attend law school came quite as an accident because we had an economic slowdown in New York City. I think one of the presidents told the mayor of New York, drop dead, when he asked to be bailed out from a financial crisis in 1974. So at that time, I had been teaching for 5 years, and I thought it would be ample opportunity for me to attend law school. And I was fortunate that, unbeknownst to me, I qualified for a scholarship. So I actually went to Fordham Law School on a scholarship, although I had saved my teaching salary and had worked night school and had worked summer camps to save up the money to attend law school. But as it turned out, I was able to use that money for other endeavors.
Wow, wonderful. So what legal positions did you acquire when you graduated from law school? Right after law school, what type of legal work did you do?
Well, even in law school, I didn't really have any mentors. There were only about 5 of us that could identify with the Spanish-speaking community. And we recognized that the employment opportunities in the legal profession would be difficult because New York still was going through a difficult fiscal time back in 1977. There weren't many jobs to be had. And one day, lo and behold, there's a knock on the door of my classroom, and the dean sent for me. And the dean introduced me to someone from the Kings County District Attorney's Office who said that he was at the school recruiting for the DA's office, which is something I gave no inclination of being interested in. And apparently the dean of the school had recommended me, and I sat for the interview and was hired, if not on the spot, within a few days. So that's where I started my legal career as an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn, or Kings County, if you will.
I know eventually you began to work with the police department, right? And the counsel's office?
Again, that becomes another someone knocking on the door. Apparently, there was someone in an influential position at the police commissioner's office whose wife worked in probation, the New York City Department of Probation. And he was having a conversation with his wife. And his wife said, well, I know someone at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And that's how I got to meet Arnold Criss. Arnold Criss was destined to be on Mayor Ed Koch's campaign committees, re-election committees, and also was destined to be a deputy police commissioner. So he nominated me to Robert McGuire. Robert McGuire saw that I could handle the task that he set forth. And shortly thereafter, I got hired. as special counsel, assistant commissioner for trials, and ultimately I was promoted to the rank of deputy police commissioner in charge of trials. Trials are it's sort of like JAG in the military. You are the chief administrative officer over disciplinary matters. So basically in the police department, I was the judge over court martials.
Right. And obviously you eventually became a judge. Who knocked on your door to get you interested into the bench?
Well, that's another, strange story. You kind of figured that you must have been born under a lucky star, because I left the police department, entered private practice in Jackson Heights, and I was working in Jackson Heights as an attorney, handling a variety of cases, real estate law, landlord-tenant law, criminal law, matrimonial law, a general practitioner, because as you can imagine, there were very few Spanish-speaking lawyers back in that time, back in 1984, not only in New York City, but even more so in Jackson Heights. And there was a community of Spanish speakers growing and growing, leaps and bounds, if you will, that needed legal representation. So that's where I started my practice. And then one day, one of my college classmates said to me, "Have you ever considered the New York State judiciary?" And I said, "Well, I was a judge for 4 years with the police department. I have no objection." And I discussed it with my wife, and we applied for a position with the housing court, because apparently there were 10 openings. They were increasing the size of that bench by 50%. They were going from 20 judges to 30. And I was fortunate enough to get called for interviews. And apparently I fit the bill, and I was hired and began my service as a member of the judiciary in March of 1985. So about a year in private practice, and then onto the bench.
And that made you that was a historical event, because you are now the first Latino judge ever appointed or elected to a judicial position in Queens. And eventually, right? Is that correct? That's
Well, actually, it's partially correct, because we had a judge by the name of Ramos Lopez, who in I think 1964, 1965, he was elected to the civil court in New York County. And I think he sat because he was assigned to the special narcotics court. And I think for some period of time, he may have sat where you sit now in Kew Gardens.
right.
I think, no, Kew Gardens is a new building. I don't know, I can't remember when it was constructed, but at one time he sat there. And also when I was on the housing court bench, Joseph Torres was a family court judge in Queens County. So I wasn't the first actually to sit in Queens County, but I was the first, if we want to call it the first, I was the first housing judge of Puerto Rican heritage or Latino heritage to sit in Queens County. But later on, I did become the first countywide elected official representative of the Spanish-speaking community.
Yeah, and tell us about that process, going from an appointed housing court judge to deciding to run for civil court in Queens.
Well, I was appointed in 1985, and I sat in New York County. And in 1987, the chief administrative judge asked me to take over a position in Queens Housing Court, because one of the judges, I believe it was Judge Harbater or Judge Milano, had been elevated to the civil court. And I went out there to Queens County, our home, and began serving housing court there. But immediately I began to notice certain items of concern. Namely, there was only one Spanish language interpreter in the building, and there was none in the main calendar part where all the cases would be called. There were a significant number of cases called in what we call landlord-tenant court, housing court, landlord-tenant court, where Latin names rang out. For example, Jones versus Gonzalez, Smith versus Gutierrez, and so forth and so on. And there'd be no answer. And I began to realize that many of these people just didn't understand, could not follow what was going on. So I decided that they needed to have some sort of person that they could go to for assistance, not necessarily myself, but someone. And I began to advocate for greater designation or assignment of resources to address the needs of the Spanish-speaking community, and to see what we could do about having some judges on the bench. Because I looked around, and not like today where we have a significant number of judges, but I think in 1987 in the entire state, we may have had somewhere in the range of 20 members of the judiciary out of somewhere, I don't know, I guess 800 or more. So it's a significantly low percentage that could identify with the Spanish-speaking community. And that's something that they really needed in Queens, because they needed an identity figure, someone to encourage them not only to pursue their rights under the law, but also to give their children some ambition, something to look forward to, a slice of the American pie, to aspire to those things that you yourself and your children have aspired to, and other members of judiciary today. Remember, 2021 is not what it was, the country is not what it was in 1985. So we've made significant progress, but that progress comes at a price, and it comes with a lot of encouragement and hard work by people, not only in the public sector, but also at home, individuals at home that encourage their children and their family members to pursue.
When you were a housing court judge in 1985, I understand you met with a bunch of other judges in Albany, you were a founding member of the Association of Judges of Hispanic Heritage, who we now know as Latino Judges Association. And tell us about that. How were you a part of founding such a great association?
Well, I was the runt of the litter, if you will, because I was in some very distinguished circles. Governor Cuomo, Mario, had a special assistant named Shirley Romanesky. And she recommended to the governor that he host a conference in Albany during Hispanic Heritage Month to honor the Hispanic legislators and jurists that had been part of New York's history. And so we were invited to attend. I should say we were given transportation and room and board. And that's encouraging. But when I got up there were about 15 of us. Joseph, I know somewhere in your office you have that photograph showing the founding members. And there were about 15 of us. Included in that group were such distinguished jurists as John Caro of the Appellate Division, Judge Quinones, he was sitting in Supreme Court in Brooklyn, Judge Luis Gonzalez, that recently retired, I understand, from his chair at the Appellate Division First Department, Irma Vidal Santaella, who was the first Latina elected to Supreme Court in Bronx County, Carmen Beauchamp-Saparic, who was the first Latina woman elected to Supreme Court in New York County. So as you can see, I'm going through Appellate Division, Supreme Court, and finally we get down to me. I was there from Housing Court, which is on the lowest rung. But we were all equals in the eyes of each other, and I was honored to be in their presence. Frank Torres, the son of Felipe Torres, who is one of our pioneers. Felipe was a judge of the family court appointed by, I believe, Mayor Wagner back in the 50s. So we had a distinguished group. We caucused, if you will. We spoke about things of interest, concerns in our community, and we came up with a platform organizing the Association of Judges of Hispanic Heritage. And our platform was basically straightforward. We wanted to encourage our youth to pursue careers in the law, to become lawyers, to become members of the bar, and ultimately to become members of the judiciary. And it was a struggle because from 1987, 1985, I should say, through 1995, those 10 years, my first 10 years as a member of the judiciary, our numbers did not increase significantly. I would say that if we went from 15 to 25, that would be maybe an overstatement. So it was a struggle for all of us. But remember, we had day jobs. Our job was to serve the people of the state, to adjudicate, to write decisions. And so it was wonderful to start an organization, but as far as being able to run with the ball, so to speak, in the neighborhoods, we just didn't have the resources or the time, frankly, to do it. But we were able to at least create a presence and come in contact with other judges and convince other judges that we needed more lawyers, we needed more law students, convince law schools to admit more law students that were reflective of the Spanish-speaking community.
Yeah,
and I think we've progressed significantly. We're not there yet, but we're doing a great job.
Well, one of the things that I've heard you say in the past was when you would have your dinners with the Latino Judges Associations, your gala dinners every year, that you would do it in law schools. And the idea of that was to network with the Latino Lawyers Associations in the LAUSA student associations.
Well, that's correct. But also you have to remember that people learn from examples. And if a dean of a law school, the administrators of the law school, the professors out of law school get to rub elbows with Latino judges and to see that we're not contagious in the sense of bringing down the law school, that will encourage them to accept more Latino students, because they not only speak to us about the law and analyze our jurisprudence, and we engage in conversation with them along the lines of academia, but also we tell them our stories, our background. Imagine when we had a conference at Fordham University School of Law. I can't remember when it was exactly, but it was somewhere around 2010. And we had our annual dinner there, and we joined, of course, with the Latino law students of that university. But who was in the audience with us? No one other than Sonia Sotomayor. This is 1 year before she's named to the United States Supreme Court. So, and also we had the chief judge of New York State, we had all the members of the Court of Appeals there at Fordham Law School, breaking bread with the professors, with the administration, and with Latino law students. What pride they must have had in seeing all of these bright, articulate, and famous Latino jurists there, showing them off, mentoring them there that night, and the administration looking out among us and saying, yes, the Latino community certainly has a great deal of judicial talent. So I think that that's one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of, our ability to network within law schools, and not only Fordham, but Columbia Law with the help of Justice Rolando Acosta, at the New York Law School with the help of Fabiola Soto, at NYU with the help of Judge Torres, and many, many other members of the judiciary who attended those fine institutions certainly lent their hand in networking and bringing more students to the attention of the administration.
Right. So you went from what you referred to as the lower rung of the housing court all the way to the Supreme Court. Tell us about some of the obstacles you had to confront in obtaining a nomination to the Supreme Court in Queens County, the first in Queens County.
In late 1987, I believe it was, there was a political party in Queens County known as the Liberal Party. Some of you that are students of politics, New York politics, will recall that Mayor Rudy Giuliani was elected to the mayoralty by virtue of the support he received from the Liberal Party. He was a Liberal Party, Republican Party nominee for mayor. And the Liberal Party nominated me to be their candidate in a county-wide election for the office of Judge of the Civil Court. I had endeavored to obtain the Democratic Party nomination. Unfortunately, I did not have the political contacts. I was not a member of a political club. I was not someone who could identify with any of the leadership per se, because frankly, there were no elected political leaders that represented the Spanish language community in the sense that they spoke Spanish or had Spanish ancestry. Rather, even the most densely populated Latino areas were represented by non-Latinos. Of course, that has changed with the years, but at that time, there was no one. And as a matter of fact, even though I did not get the nomination from the Democratic Party, I chose to circulate my own petition and started an insurgent campaign, if you will, where I to challenge them to a primary. Unfortunately, I got knocked off the ballot because, frankly, you know, when you're the first to do something, there's no one around to teach you or willing to teach you. So that happened again the following year, and I decided after that to just continue my position as a housing judge, and ultimately, back in 1994, the politics of the nation were changing. Congressman Conyers, I believe, decided to convene hearings in many of the large cities to ask the question, why aren't there any elected officials representative of the minority communities? Obviously, there was a lot of gerrymandering that was going on. Districts would be cut up so that the rank and file that existed could be reelected. And when Conyers brought that to national attention, and specifically in New York City, then the Democratic Party in Queens County saw the light, if you will. And I always was friendly with a number of elected officials in the African American community. Helen Marshall, who went later on to become borough president, she was a backer of mine, and she went to the county boss. And ultimately, the county gave me their support. And in 1994, I was elected to a countywide seat, becoming the first Latino to be elected to a countywide political position when I was elected to the Civil Court.
And then Supreme Court.
And the next year, now that I was already a proven commodity, I'm being sarcastic, of course. Now, the following year, there were 10 openings. I think there were 10 openings, 7 or 10 openings on the Supreme Court. And the county leader, who is Congressman Thomas Manton, asked me if I would accept the nomination for the Supreme Court, and I did. Yeah. So in 1995, November of 95, I was elected, and I began service in January of 1996. And 5 years later, the chief administrative judge of the state nominated me to an appellate court. So I wound up sitting on the 2nd, 11th, and 13th Judicial District as a member of the 5-judge panel known as the appellate term.
Right. So when you were coming up the ranks, because there were so few of you, you didn't have many mentors, obviously, because there weren't any judges that preceded you. But those of us like myself and other Latino judges, you blazed the trail for us, obviously. So we were the beneficiaries of your groundbreaking work. And so we certainly owe a debt of gratitude to you. But let me ask you this final question, and that is, what would you like to be remembered for as given your long, distinguished career? What would you most want to be remembered for?
Well, I did have a mentor. We all had a mentor back in those days. In the 1970s, there was a Justice John Carroll, who took an interest in law students. And I remember Justice Carroll coming to law schools at conferences where Latino law students would congregate to share their common experiences. One such was at the University of Pennsylvania. I think it was circa 75 or 76, that John came out and spoke to us and encouraged us to bring to pull the others with us. Don't just go forward. Pull those behind you and help them get a leg up. And I remember one thing he said to me. He said, if justice is blind, we should take the blinkers off, the blinders off, meaning, hey, get a look at what's going on, because as anyone who has studied history will know, John Carroll was one of the first members of the judiciary to call out police abuses in the minority communities.
Right.
And I would like to be remembered like John for his humanitarianism. He was a person who loved people and cared for people. And also, I'd like to be remembered in the same vein that we remember another pioneer, Edwin Torres. Edwin Torres stood for integrity. He was a no-nonsense judge that insisted on accountability. So if you're a justice or a judge and you take the bench and you put on that black robe, yes, have compassion, care for the human being, for the human spirit, but also don't look away from your responsibility and your integrity, because that is among the most important virtues that we can have as a member of the bench.
Great. I said that was my last question, but I really do want to hear your answer to one final question. And that is, given your great wisdom, the experience that you have, all of those years on the bench, and I know you were teaching at Fordham for some time as well, Fordham Law School. What advice would you have for young lawyers who aspire to the bench?
Well, the most important thing has to be your involvement in your local community. I think I was told by someone who read the biography of Lyndon B. Johnson. He said, politics is local. My ability to convince the Democratic political machinery in Queens County that I should be their candidate for elected office came from my involvement in the community. Attending various functions in the community, civic associations, cultural associations, religious organizations. Be involved, care for your neighbor, devote time. I can't remember all of the times I went to speak at elementary schools. You get up in front of a sixth grade audience and you wear your black robe, because if you don't wear a black robe, you just come in, they won't know that you're anything unique or special. Not that you need that accolade, but you want them to identify with the subject matter of your conversation, of your speech. So participating in community events, donating your time is always helpful if you wish to pursue. And I won't encourage you to join a political party, because those that join political parties sometimes have to support candidates that they honestly don't appreciate their values. And you don't want to be in a position like that. I don't want to be negative, but when I was running for political office the first time, I said, listen, you can do better than those that are going to jail for corruption. I can't tell you in my 10 years in the housing court, 9 years, how many members of unfortunately, of Queens politics, how many of them were indicted and jailed. So, right. I always said I could be better than that. I can guarantee you that I'm not going to do anything corrupt. Right. So, but I encourage the young to go to law school, get your education in the lower grades, go through college, be involved, do things, whatever you're interested in, help out in any way.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, it was a great pleasure for me to interview today, Justice Rios. You are one of my heroes in the faith and in the profession. And I thank you for sharing your incredible and inspiring story about the service that you've devoted your life to, not only to the Latino community, but to all of the communities of New York State. And we thank you for blazing the trail so that so many of us would be able to come after you. And, the numbers were low in the 1980s and even in the 1990s, but there's certainly been tremendous progress since then. And a lot of that is due to folks like you and the other judges you mentioned as our founding members of the Latino Judges Association. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.